how bloody good is this? Absolutely blew me away, because I'd completely forgotten how good they were.
And now, to start the 16 hours of Live Aid, would you welcome Status Quo?
They went for the throat. They went for what they wanted to do. Fuck the record company, get them and do what you want to do musically. And that's what they did.
They're one of the most consistent and one of the best live bands ever.
You listen to that and you think, that's all been done before, but oh no, it hasn't.
They got a fan base quite quickly, and that fan base is loyal. That fan base likes what they do.
Let's see the audience enjoy themselves. You know, they pay to come and see us, and let's give them a good time. That's what it was all about, really.
I've got a very soft spot for picturesque. We need to do that one again.
I mean, what is it called? Picturesque match typical messages. You say that when you're pissed. Ridiculous.
What Quo were was a happy-go-lucky, lightweight pop band with psychedelic overtones. And they stood out a little bit from the crowd, but not that much.
It was very much, you know, you're told what to do, you do it, you get a wage, and you go out on the road and promote it, and that's it. It's as simple as that.
Everything happened so quickly in the late 60s. You know, things sort of turned over. The Who, my generation. I mean, that defines mod culture. And yet within 3 years, Roger Daltrey could have passed off for, you know, Robert Plant, and they were playing heavier rock than almost anyone else, probably bar Led Zeppelin. So, I mean, these changes happen so quickly, and the same thing happened with Quo.
What bearing does it have on what they do today? I think not a lot, only insofar as that they were into gritty guitar sounds back then, albeit much more underplayed. I mean, tracks like Technicolor Dreams from the first Matchstickable album has got some gritty guitars.
It's of a time, it's of a place, but it's really enjoyable. When you hear pictures of Matchstick Men or you hear Ice in the Sun, you like them. They're likeable tunes.
I thought the title was just ridiculous, too long, Just call it Matchstick Men. Simple.
Ice in the Sun, the only thing it's really got in common with today is that it's a shuffle. Of course, this song was written by Marty Wilde, but it actually sounds to me more like The Move than Quo of this day and age.
as if I couldn't care.
It's a bit like a time capsule in a way, I think. It's sort of caught in time and quite charming for it.
That's basically the intro and verse, and the chorus is really simple. It goes. And there you have it.
Their second album was called Spare Parts, and really that summed it up. It was awful. They'd run out of steam almost before they'd started, in a strange sort of way.
It threw a spanner in the works, and although it wasn't an immediate success, you know, it was the start of something, and that something was, you know, the Boogie Beast.
How can I know just what goes on in your mind if you always walk away? So what's the good?
They were beginning to probably have a bit of confidence because they'd had a bit of success. And what they wanted to wear and the way that they wanted to look, that was beginning to come through.
I don't believe this is what they really wanted to do. That they were very much under the influence of a record company and a producer who had a lot of power in the record company.
I just felt at that time we weren't sure what was happening, which direction we were going. I just felt they were bringing these titles out just to sort of try and throw everybody, and it was all a bit odd, and it was all, maybe they was still trying to be sort of psychedelic, which we weren't, you know, and we were fighting the elements with this bloody thing.
They had one minor hit, which is called Are You Growing Tired of My Love, which reached the top 50 in the UK. And in a way, that was almost a message to their fans. Are you growing tired of our music?
It's interesting to note, Francis told me years ago, that actually Rick was brought into the band to be the main vocalist. So it's interesting that the archetypal quo stuff that we all know started to feature more Francis as lead vocal.
They decided that they didn't want to do, you know, what they'd been signed for, but there was something else very inherent that they really felt the need to do, and that's what you really start to hear on Spare Parts.
They knew that part of their career was over, so they had a choice. Either that's the end of status quo, we had a fun time, we had a couple of albums, had a good enjoyable momentum on the road, or they moved into a different area. Fortunately for everybody, they chose the latter route with the backing of their label Pi.
To listen to, I think there are better tracks on Picturesque Match Stickable, but Spare Parts is an easier album to listen to from beginning to end, if you have to.
Down the Dustpipe was their first post-psychedelia hit single. It defined where they want to go. It was simple, straightforward, it was rock and roll, it was 12-bar boogie if you want to put it in there, and also had a melody line that stayed in your head.
It's probably the first one that Joe Public remembers as being a classic sound Quo song.
It's soaked in grease, the whole kind of image that they're evoking there. And it's, I mean, it was a single. I don't think it was actually on any of their albums that they put out on Pi.
Which, to my mind, was a very bold move.
Another shuffle, another 12-bar blues, the harmonica, which was going to be introduced later, poppier than some of the later shuffles, but I think recognised all round probably as the best of the Pi singles, definitely.
I think it's about as bad as I got with Pi. I mean, it's a clever little song, and it started to show what Quo could, I guess, and would do. But it's a fairly lightweight song. I personally don't think it's dated. You know, I think it's a song that people relate to, and they, oh yeah, that's Status Quo, that's a good song. And yeah, good song.
I actually feel very sorry for anyone who bought Quo's third album, Mark Kelly's Greasy Spoon, because of the first two. Because it was nothing like the first two. Pat Barlow was their manager then, found a cafe somewhere in South London and found this woman and who ran the cafe and stuck her down on the table with us and put a cigarette in her mouth. And we never ever saw her again, and I think she said, well, send us a copy. You know, I don't know if we ever did.
Mark Kelly's Greasy Spoon, I think, was starting to pave the way for what would come later. Certainly with a track like Spinning Wheel Blues, which was a classic blues shuffle in G. This was, I think, when they were starting to explore their love of the blues and this 12-bar formula a lot more.
It was scuzzy, it was basic, but it was honest. And immediately it was, this is a different type of Quo. This has got an energy, this has got a 12-bar feel to it, this has got a bit of boogie about it. And Quo almost came alive.
It's pretty repugnant, really. If you contrast that with the delicate, wonderful colours of the debut album, and then you've got this two stereo albums down the line, you've got this grease-ridden sort of record that, you know, bears no musical relation and no visual relation and no cultural relation to sort of what they've gone through. I suppose it must have been a bit of a shock for people at the time.
But they put some quirky little stuff in there. A thing that the old bluesers never did was the detuning, not so much. And this, when it goes to the dominant, when it goes to D, they've detuned, they go down to a low D, which shows that they were getting into open tunings and things even back then.
Mark Kelly's Greasy Spoon is definitely the start of the dirty, unwashed, flared denims, you know, and the relentless driving boogie.
Here was the major change. And this is when things really started to happen for them. They had now focused and found the direction they were going to go in.
After Mark Kelly's, I don't think we ever attempted to play Matchstick Men again. I think if it got the audience pushed us to play it, we'd probably do it. But I think we're trying to put that behind us.
Quo were always about live performance. That's where Quo really always hit very strongly and very well. And one of their first live anthems was a combination of a track called Is It Me, which led into Gotta Go Home.
I don't know if it was an anthem. I think some of the later extended songs were actually better songs, but it was certainly seemed to set a trend for this kind of track.
Gotta Go Home was a song that was indicative of almost everything that Quo would go on to use later on in the 70s and be incredibly successful with.
I gotta get on home 'cause it's a long, long ride now. I've been away too long, I gotta get on home now. I'm getting far too old to build my dream of fortune. Time has flown and now I know what I must do. I gotta go home, I gotta go home, I gotta go home to ease my mind.
It became an instant anthem for the fans, mainly not because of the studio version, but because of what they did live. And remember, however great studio versions of songs were from Quo, it was always when they went on stage, everything came alive.
I saw her talking now, my ears were burning. Her feet started walking now, they started turning. My eyes were half open, but she didn't see me there. We ran along, walking across the rooftops in my chair.
People talk about Quo in the 70s making the same albums over and over again. They were a one-trick pony. Not quite true. What Quo could do is vary the pace, and In My Chair is one of the examples how they could modulate what they did.
I think the band were desperately trying to shake off the image of nice, clean, flower power clothes and all the rest of it. And it was, although it was another shuffle, this time in E, it was very much grittier, dirtier.
They recorded In My Chair at around about the Mark Kelly's period, and it's an incredibly simple song, works incredibly well the way that Status Quo delivered it.
It was probably the first one after Down the Dustpipe that really started to identify the commercial sound of Francis Rossi's voice.
My teeth were laughing now, we couldn't stop smiling. We danced at the mystery band without even trying. My eyes were half open, but we didn't see him there.
They refined it slightly. It still had an edge to it, and a dirty edge at that, but also a catchy melody. But they could lay back a little bit off it, make it work without going full tilt. And that's what In My Chair really showed the fans, that you don't have to headbang all the time. You can lay back a little bit and enjoy the music and let it wash over you. Dog of Two Heads is arguably the best album they made when they were signed to Pi.
Well, it really was the first album in its entirety that dealt with the boogie factor, I think.
And for my money, it's definitely the best of the Pi era.
Love, it seems I just can't find. Love, it seems I just can't find. It seems that I'm the one I've left behind.
If you're going to claim Dog of Two Head is the best thing that they did on the Pi label, I'm not certain that's strictly the case, because there's something to be found in all the records. I mean, they're not all, I'm not saying they're great records, but they've all got something on there, I think. If you go back and listen to it, you think, well, actually, that's actually really interesting.
Now they were much more in control of their destiny. They were writing their own tracks, but they had sort of really weird titles.
The track Gert and Dula, which was laughingly referred to by some DJs as Gerdundula, who didn't realise that Gert and Dula were a dubious German pair that they met many years ago.
Gert was the guy and Ula was the bird, and they were great fans of ours, and the lads decided to write a song about them.
an amazing record because here was a band prepared to try and vary their themes and their motifs while still staying very much in the blues rock vein.
The sort of mid to late 60s were an incredibly successful pop label. And of course Quo had taken this deliberate route not to be a pop band.
I think they wanted us to be a pop band, because I think that way they thought that's the way for them to make loads of money, because, you know, pop being popular music.
I think the Pie years were a source of frustration. I've spoken with the guys at length many times about this, and they went through a commercial period with took a couple of great singles for a start, Ice in the Sun and Pictures of Matchstick Men, which were great psychedelic pop singles.
What it did was make sure that they didn't get lost in the whole psychedelia tornado, and gave them an opportunity to develop their music, which they did. And all credit to Pie, because Pie could have easily dropped them after Spare Parts bombed.
The recording experience and ability that came through, and of course any money that came through as well, obviously helped this band get on their feet and move into a direction that they wanted to. It put them in a position where they could truly do that. So I think it was very important for the band.
Quo didn't have just a long run of success at Pie, nothing else. But what they had done is establish a future that went beyond hit singles.
They were probably disappointed that they had to let us go in the end. But like I said, we had to move forward. And so we did.
The main thing about, from this point on, is they were very focused. They'd found their groove, they'd found their legs, and they were off and running.
Well, Piledriver's the album where it really does start to take off.
Piledriver, what a great title for an album. It really summed up what Quo were about at the time, which is heads down, no nonsense, mindful boogie. And they came out with an album, their first tour at their new label, which said, you know what, we're going into a new era, we've got smiles on our faces, we've got a cover that really shows us playing live, with our heads right firmly forward.
When I've spoken to Rick about this in the past, he reckons this was the first real Quo album. And I think they were starting to formulate the image.
They produced it themselves. They had a hit single in Paper Plane, which again was classic Quo, what was to become classic Quo, with that 12-bar up tempo, let's have a good time, big smile in your face, put a drink in your hand and just bang your head.
Paper Plane is a perfect example of how every Quo album would have a song that would just be like, oh, that's, you know, that's the one.
Quo fans would sing that all night. You know, you see them in the audience leaping around singing it, they know every word. fabulous.
Piledriver also featured a great stage closer, one of the epic tracks, again later on, Roadhouse.
Much as it's not a Patch on the Doors original, because nothing can be a Patch on the Doors original, it was a very, very good cover.
I'll keep your eyes on the road, your hands upon the wheel. I'll keep your eyes on the road, your hands upon the wheel. Yeah, we're going to the roadhouse, we're gonna have a real good time.
You might have looked back and seen rock and roll artists doing similar things, but they'd taken it from, you know, the Elvis style and turned it into their own thing. So they were really quite unique. They, you know, they had that look now, they had their sound, they knew what they were going to do, and they were a successful live act. So at this point it was onwards and upwards.
For me, and I can only talk personally, Hello's my favourite Quo album. I think it's a great record. I think every song is a killer, has a certain cohesion to them, and Hello was the moment when they really brought everything together.
You had Piledriver, which had done the groundwork, and you had the earlier albums, of course. But with Hello, I mean, they sold a lot of albums.
I think Hello might actually have been the first one I really went out and bought, although in retrospect, as I've said, I think Piledriver was alluding to what they would later become.
I think a lot of people like that album. I think it was a stepping stone because it had things like Roll Over, Lay Down on it. And Quo fans loved it, you know, because all four of us wrote that, and we wrote that in the studio, and because my name's on it.
It's got Roll Over, Lay Down, which is a great opening, but isn't a straight ahead rocker in terms of just getting your head banging. It's more of a gentle swaying number.
I think there might be a feeling that kind of they hit a peak. There's some sort of peak given that, you know, for that kind of new era with Vertigo. There'd only been Piledriver before it, and then they hit a peak, and then they kind of lived off that peak. I don't think they did actually live off that peak, but I think, yeah, that's probably the one that all the fans will go for.
Whether it's objectively the greatest Quo album is difficult to say. However, I would say, yes, objectively it is.
I liked it. I thought it was a good album.
It marked the introduction of a new guitar tuning, which Rick christened the B tuning because it was in B, which is the heaviest tuning known to man. And basically the B tuning, you take a guitar that's tuned in the normal way, you take the A string up a tone to B, you put and Rick uses something like a 60 gauge bottom string, you take that one down to B, an octave below. You think this fantastic modal tuning, and this was all Rick's, and it's been used in quite a few Quo songs. So when people say, oh, they're three-chord wonders and they're actually not that good musically, you just look behind the veneers, because they're fantastic players.
If you say to a lot of people, a lot of Status Quo fans, what's the first track that comes into your mind? Caroline probably would come into most people's minds before any other track. Why? Good question.
It's that intro, that guitar intro, and it just creeps in, and then as the drums come in, then it just builds and builds and builds, and it's a very commercial song, great song.
You'd have the dry ice sort of rising, and then suddenly the lights would be sort of mucking around on stage through the dry ice, and then all of a sudden silhouette, there'd be Rick Parfitt sort of head down and like playing the riff like that, and and chill would run through the crowd, and then the band would kick in, and it would all be off and up and running, and 2 hours later, what a night.
If you hear Carol on the radio, yes, you recognise it straight away, but it's quite a hard song to sing and hum. You try it.
Come on, sweet Caroline. It was like sing-along, but not in the sort of, pub sing-along. It was, although it was played in pubs, obviously, in the jukeboxes, it was intelligent sing-along, shall I say, and it was blues-based, and blues has a good reputation.
It shows that Quo were ever so clever in delivering simple songs, and I think that's their real secret. There's bands that would pay $1 million to be able to do what they have done, and very few have managed it.
So along came the Quo album, and it built on the success of Piledriver and Hello, and started to build to the point where Quo were going to have #1 hits. Quo were going to have a #1 album.
The Quo album was really just more of the same. I don't know if they ever actually sat down and said, okay, we've got to write another song like Caroline, or what they did, but I suspect there was possibly a bit of that in there.
You have an album that comes out with any band. Who's going to remember, for instance, Fireball by Deep Purple? One of the best albums they did. But everyone remembers Machine Head. So everyone's going to remember Hello because it was the album that came out and broke the band. But I really do think Quo was a better album.
But I mean, Down Down's the best song I ever wrote for me. I just absolutely love it. It kicks some serious ass.
And there are very few rock records that have actually been made that demonstrate the sheer power of a band. The Who were able to do it, and I think Down Down does it for Quo.
Down Down was the first #1 hit Quo had. Finally they hit the top of the charts, at last.
Just the lyrics were nice and simple, and it was a great riff, and there's that lovely long opening, and it's a pleasure, it was just fabulous, and fans love it, and it's just, there's something about it, it's just got a magic about it. And I just wish there were more songs around like that.
When you hear a song like Down Down, just the way it builds up, the way it kicks in, the riff and everything, I just think it's great. Absolutely love it to death. It's a brilliant song.
And it keeps on in the pause. And so on. And then the riff comes in. Ah, there's the quo we know. Gradually building it. And so on, the bass comes in. And so you've got this great riff. You've got a verse, down, down, deeper and down. Slightly ambiguous lyric, but what the hell? And the vocal sound, Francis, Rick, the two-part harmony, a simple verse, which goes up to an E, S, and then we'll put a little pushback in here, just, and so on. So we've already had more than the 3 chords, okay? And then it repeats this section, so you come back to that wonderful intro. And then they'll always think of something just when you thought, okay, that's it, simple. We'll push in something else in the middle. So you come into that lovely... which is the section that they milk on stage, because as soon as they leave that chord hanging, you see the hands coming, and back comes that riff.
'Down Down' isn't necessarily better than anything they'd done before, but it was right single, right time, right label, right marketing, and everything just came together and hit hard. And once you got a #1 single, everyone sits up and takes notice. And On the Level came through as well. So finally, they had an album that sold enough copies to make them a big band.
1976, on the release of the album Blue for You, went straight in at #1. I mean, that says it all.
Blue for You, second best album the band ever did. It's a great album.
Piledriver, Hello, On the Level, Blue for You. It's in that string of Quo albums that are nailing them as the band of the moment.
It's probably the end of an era to a large extent in terms of studio albums, because Quo had reached the end of that phase of their life and career. They were ready to move on to a new style, as it were.
They were definitely the hottest thing at the moment, and it was quite natural. They would go straight in at #1.
Every time a band came, we'd have to travel up to Auckland, and that's what I did with Status Quo and Blue for You. Yep. You can still hear me yelling for the mystery song, which they never played in the TV show.
There's no way you could say, oh, whose song's this? Because it's got the Status Quo emblem on it, you know, fabulous songs.
It's sticking to a formula that the guys know works for them. So, yeah, I mean, literally, I mean, good luck to them that they got there. You know, they had their first #1 single, and then they got their first sort of #1 album. I don't even know what it was that made me buy the record, but I did buy it, and I went home and I put it on, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this is good. It's a great live album.
Whoever was working out where they should record this got it absolutely right.
It was one of those gigs where you could see the 3 balconies, and you'd see them bounce, because the kids were jumping up and down in time with the music, and you see this, you think like, how can it stand it? I hope it doesn't break.
it does draw on album material that wasn't chart singles. And that's where some of those songs really do come into their own.
You know, Rick said to me on many occasions, we do it it's much better live. And I say, well, of course it's better live. You bloody know the song now. You know, you were working off chord charts and cues when you were learning things. But the live album, which had been released just before I started working with them, was just monstrously good.
Because they're a fantastic live band, as anybody who saw Live Aid, you know, coming on in the daytime and kicking the whole thing off, they got the place rocking. Rocking all over the world. That's what they do.
I'm gonna tell your mama what you're gonna do. Come on now, put your dancing shoes. Here we go. Rocking all over the world. Sing something. And I like it, 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 I like it. Here we go. Rocking all over the world.
Rocking all over the world, I think, was a disappointment. It's not a bad album, but that was the beginning of the decline for me, for Status Quo. Naff is the word that comes to mind.
Right, well, Rocking All Over the World's the start of the real commercialisation era of Quo. But I don't necessarily think you could blame that on Pete Williams, not least because I know he'll be talking on this DVD.
I was basically brought in, believe it or not, to clean up the sound and open up America, which was difficult. Number one, because they hated touring America, but number two, if you think of the British bands that had made it big in America, they featured a particular kind of voice. And Francis wasn't like that. And I don't know whether it was reluctance on the part of the Americans to take this sort of low-key English thing, but it didn't happen, unfortunately.
Pip was great with me because he would ask me, he would say, look, John, can you play this and can you play that? And he'd describe it to me and I instantly would know what he wanted, and it was fabulous, you know. And I think he's a great producer, and also I realised that after seeing Pip play, that he was a fabulous guitarist as well, a great guitarist in fact. He should have joined the band.
They've also got songs like Dirty Water, Holds You Back, which are much more melodic, more obviously melodic. They push melody slightly more to the fore. It was always there with Quo, but now it took much more of an important centre stage position.
It was becoming a little un-Quo to me, but there you go.
First of all, the C, the F, the G and the C is the basic song. And then to extrapolate on that, to play the inversions, C major, C over E, F, F sharp diminished, C, G, C. Perfect.
Can't Stand the Heat was just a bunch of tosh, basically. Really was.
And I just thought, well, it is a good experiment, but it wasn't really what you know, the ardent Quo fan wanted. And let's face it, after all, at the end of the day, it's them who buy the records.
I don't think If You Can't Stand the Heat was as good as Rockin' All Over the World.
The diehards loved Quo live. The diehards are starting to drift away from the albums. The diehards were beginning to feel this Quo is not what we want.
When you have success, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Keep doing the same thing. So not really marketing time, no. Delivering the product.
I think it was a solid album. In retrospect, certainly the fans maybe disagreed with the idea of using girls and horns on there, but you know, they'd paid their dues. They'd spent a lot of hours in the studio giving the fans what they wanted.
A lot of old fans have said to me that they don't like Quo anymore because of the producers taking over. We can't please everybody all the time.
If you hear Rockin' All Over the World played live, it's not dissimilar to the studio version. If you hear Whatever You Want played live, it's got balls.
Whatever you want, whatever you like, whatever you say, you pay your money, you take your choice. Whatever you need, whatever you use, whatever you win, whatever you lose.
And it really proved the point that however much Quo could make polished music, there was still the rock and roller within them who burst out every so often in denim and leather and said, we are going to get you on your feet, we're going to get you headbanging because we still can.
We did try to get back to a more basic sound after If You Can't Stand the Heat.
Possibly one of the last classic Quo songs that they wrote. I'm not saying that after that, they wrote good songs, but classics.
I could take you home on the midnight train.
I can't believe that you wouldn't like that song but played by the original four members, because it is a classic without a doubt.
If I had my last breath and I've written something that everybody knows, I'd be very proud of that. And they've had lots. So, need I say more? No.
A lot of diehards felt, this isn't what Status Quo are about, this isn't what we want. So they came out with something that said, yes it is.
Whatever you want.
The thing Quo did with Pip Williams, they had a rapport with him, or seemed to have one from the studio. They understood the balance, and he understood the balance, between the hard-hitting rock and the more polished sound. John Eden started to take them away from that, and started to take them into a different area, which is too polished.
But I think the fact that Quo may have had more of a handle, may have actually forced the fact that they had more of a handle on the album, gave it that little bit more of the older Quo sound.
In the past, they could turn around and say, oh, Pip, sort that one out, you decide what edit section to use there. They were then forced to get involved with John, and I think this was really good for the band. I mean, I played guitar on virtually every track I produced with them, or some guitar. And if there was a part, like in the Army now, I did all the lead guitars on that. But if there was a part that maybe Francis thought, I can't do, what do you want me to do? Oh, fuck it, you do it, Pip. And they couldn't do this now, So I was off with the Moody Blues for 16 months.
See, that was another song which I thought was great, and a lot of Quo fans didn't like it because they said it wasn't really Status Quo, but good song, well arranged. I thought John Eden was okay.
I personally love the record, but for a lot of people it was almost downhill all the way after that record.
What you're proposing, and not believing that I'm finally believing. What you're proposing, and not believing that I'm finally believing. What you're proposing.
I think at that point Quo was starting to get a little confused as to, shall we go completely into becoming a mature pipes and slippers band, or do we still want to rock a little bit?
The hits were getting cheesier, even if they were rock songs. You know, the reliance on covers.
The writing was probably not going as far as some people in the band wanted. I know that Alan Lancaster was starting to get a bit disconcerted around about this time.
Just Supposing and Never Too Late have actually stood the test of time far better than something like Rockin' All Over the World and If You Can't Stand the Heat have. They're not bad. They're not bad albums as far as Quo are concerned.
Never Too Late for me is the end of an era, but not deliberately. It's not as if Quo had an opportunity and a knowledge of what they wanted to do. I think this was an opportunity and knowledge of what they didn't want to do.
Credibility evaporated very quickly.
It was possibly they were feeling the time that with the touring and everything else, they may have been mentally exhausted, I don't know.
If we'd taken a lot of time off and just really settled down and took life easy and took time off and just rethought ideas and arrangements and things, we could have, I think it would have probably lasted maybe another 5 years, maybe, I don't know.
I love the stuff they did in the 70s. But by the 80s, there was me, you know, in my 20s, going to bars, trying to pick up girls, getting drunk. Margarita's song was a great song to get drunk to. It still is.
Deep in my heart, deep in my memory, deep in a part of me, meant to be history. Could it be that I'm still wondering? I never knew what had happened to me. I didn't think it was true, that I could be just like anyone else. I take my chance with you.
Well, the back-to-back album and Margarita Time, I know that Alan Lancaster was really peed off with this one, you know, and he thought they just was starting to sound like a party band.
Back to Back's a stinker of a record, whichever way you look at it. It's crap.
Everybody knows that album for Margarita Time, which is awful. It's not status quo at all.
Margarita Time is a shit song, right? Yeah, I mean, it's rubbish. For a band, it's not even a novelty hit. I mean, if it had been a novelty, they might have got away with it, but it wasn't a novelty.
Margarita Time kind of worked for Quo. The funny thing is, I can't knock it. It actually worked ever so well.
It had no oomph, it had no belief, it had no heart, it had no passion. It was almost written just for a hit single.
But I actually liked that album. I thought the Messer Blues and Old Rag Blues were great tracks. Very poppy, but you know, it was good. But I think it was indicative that there were cracks in the walls, if you like.
I think the problem with status quo once they started to make lineup changes is that things started to go wrong a little bit.
John Coghlan had left. They didn't like Alan Lancaster, they didn't get on. There was a huge personality clash there.
He was now living in Australia, and I think he basically said, you know, if you want to do the album with me, you've got to come to Australia to do it. And that's when I introduced Jeff and Rhino into the band.
It was difficult to them actually to bring someone else into the band because they were such a close-knit unit. And I think the problems that they had at the time in terms of where do we go, were a bit confused about, do we go this way, do we go that way, was partly because of the personnel changes.
Quo, by 1982, had moved on so much from the Blue For You era that they probably dismayed quite a few of their fans. possibly if it didn't bother him, it might have been the final nail in the coffin for some real straggly-haired diehards.
A vacation in a faraway land. Uncle Sam knows the best he can. You're in the army now. Oh, you're in the army now. Now you remember what the draft man said. Nothing to do, all aim and stay in that. You're in the army now. Oh, you're in the army now.
To my way of thinking, in the army now is not just a real return to form for Status Quo, it opened up a new area for them.
In the army now, at the time, I think was the best thing that they could have done for a comeback.
In the Army Now as a track, again, it's one of the best anthems Quo has ever done. Absolutely.
It really was very much an afterthought born out of panic, because we knew that we didn't have a hit single. But hats off to Francis for recognising the potential in it for Quo, because it worked fantastically.
It's not typical Quo at all. It's not typical Quo at all, but they made that song their own. It'd be very hard for someone else to cover that song and not think it's Status Quo nowadays.
This was the first time they had commercial recognition for something that wasn't just a feel-good bop record, it was a valid musical entity.
It's not bad on record, but on live it's absolutely fantastic. When you're in that crowd, you can't tell me you won't be singing In the Army Now.
Shots ring out in the dead of night. The sergeant calls, stand up to fight. You're in the army now. Oh, you're in the army now. You're in the army now. Oh, you're in the army now.
Ain't complaining. I don't think anyone would have complained if they hadn't have bought the album out. I'm being deadly serious. It's complete and utter crap.
I think going to see him live might have been the death knell for me with Quo, because that was the start of the real schmaltzy, cheesy, cabaret, pantomime kind of Quo live that was like, what the hell's going on?
They started to become a real Cockney cliche, and everyone just thought, this is completely stupid.
The weird thing is they actually do try to experiment a little in there. It falls completely flat on its face, and the songs, as someone else has quoted in the past, sound like Chaz and Dave. Well, we've got Chaz and Dave, we don't need another one.
You think about the history that this band had, how on earth they could ever become ludicrous, I don't know, but they managed it.
Actually, Ain't Complaining was a song written by Rick and myself. We used to write a few bits and pieces together. We used to stay at home and have a few glasses of wine and write things. And this came out of the good old G tuning. But it wanted to be reasonably poppy, and I think it worked quite well. I don't think we got necessarily the best take of the master.
You also didn't have the influence of Bob Young, who I think was so important to these hits that they had in the 70s. Of course, he was writing little or nothing by this period. He'd been replaced by other people, and I think it shows.
Down in ill, in ill, in ill, in ill. I remember when I first heard that, I liked it. I can't stand the bloody song now.
After the comparative failure, if you like, of Ain't Complaining, the single and the album, here comes Burning Bridges, near to Christmas time, rockets the album back up the charts again, and Quo are off on another runner. Phenomenal.
It's a day
think Quo had reached a stage by Perfect Remedy where their era of the big hits and the big sales were over.
Perfect Remedy is no better or no worse than any Quo album between that record and Heavy Traffic, which came out a couple of years ago. They've all been shit.
I have to say this was the first album that Quo album that I did that I categorically hate. It just didn't work for me. And I actually took the unprecedented step of writing a letter to the management and the managing director of the record company at that time saying that I do not want to receive the usual flack.
It was never going to sell big unless it had a freak hit single. And to have a freak hit single would have probably meant it would have to be picked up by a movie or a TV show.
I want to put the record straight that I actually was totally against this album coming out as it was. It was far too lightweight. And I think the fans were right to have been pissed off by it.
Hang up your shoes, just kick out the blues, and rock till you drop tonight. All we do depends upon you, so rock till you drop tonight.
Rock Till You Drop. Shit.
Rock Till You Drop was the last album they made for the Phonogram organisation, Vertigo Records, a major label, if you will. And it was a fun way to go out. I don't think at the time they realised it was going to be the last album for that particular label. It was the end of a contract, but contracts get renewed and so forth.
The Rock Till You Drop album is certainly better than Ain't Complaining as an album. And it's certainly better than most of Perfect Remedy. So maybe because this band were under pressure, you know, they were playing God knows how many concerts in Russia, and they were playing all over Europe, getting record after record after record, hence it's called Rock Till You Drop.
Arguably it was a filler for that particular time. Rock Till You Drop, if it had been a much bigger hit single, may have been a different kettle of fish, but it was obviously time for something a bit different to happen.
There are no redeeming qualities about Rock Till You Drop and Perfect Remedy in any way whatsoever. They are crap albums made by a band that should no longer be existing, unfortunately. A band that I genuinely and truly love for a certain era of what they did. I mean, I really do, okay? But this is just unmitigated toss.
We hit all the high spots, the star-studded bills and those mirror balls. Half of the time we were playing a game. Half of the time I could hardly remember my name.
If you'd seen the band in the 70s, oh boy, these guys could play. It was simple, hard delivery, boogie rock, but boy, could they play. Absolutely.
It was fun. You went along, you banged your head, you went home. You had a great laugh. You got it all out of your system, whatever it was you had to get out. You'd heard some great tunes. Just a barrage of them. Bang, 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 bang.
They started as the greatest live rock band, and they finish as still arguably one of the, if not the greatest live British rock band. And they showed the young uns how to do it, believe you me.
It's been like a party, you know, and when you have gone to a live Quo show, you know, you'd have to be a very cold-hearted person not to at least tap your hand or one of your feet.
You're all there to have a good time. You do have a good time, and Quo gave you a good time. You know, I mean, at their peak, it doesn't get much better than that.
They were working class and they presented themselves in that way. And because of that, I think a lot of what they did musically was badly and grossly overlooked.
I was talking to Alan Lancaster today, funny enough, and before we did this, and he said that the original four, up to about 81 when I left, he reckons we sold 35 million records. That's a lot of records. So it just goes to prove that original bands do work.